Bonjour, je suis à Paris. I'm in Paris, and it is giving me metaphysical ideas, as everything does. Especially sitting in cathedrals. I love the cathedrals. My favorite things about Paris so far are the cathedrals, and that they have water fountains with sparkling water. It's delightful. Cathedrals are so beautiful, like, I always start crying. And they're so beautiful. They're so right, they're so full of meaning and like intense patterns and centers of all of the patterns. And there's nothing else. Like, it's kind of it. I mean, even from like a non-religious perspective, what other, I'm trying to think genuinely, and I don't think that any other achievement or like object or something has that intensity and coherence. I'm also trying to like learn geometry and get into math, because some of my poems have a structure beneath them, and so I've gotten to a level of abstraction where basically I should learn math, and I'm trying, but I have to come at it from different angles because I get bored or stressed with the traditional ways. I'm very traumatized also from school math, which is not fun. But I just like all of the symmetries and like all the different patterns and the connections between them in the cathedral. It makes me want to draw them and figure out the structures. And I was doing that. And the hand, because it's like so going from very abstract to more qualitative and more effective and more like. And that makes me need to go to Lecture Bach, which I'm reading. That's my introduction into mathematics, a book about the structure of consciousness or something. But I guess I should talk about the cathedrals too. I suppose it connects some way. Yeah, it does. Okay. Well, I don't know, there's a lot. I had so many ideas. If you want creativity, go sit in a cathedral. It's full of angels, in the sense of patterns, like I said in that other video about the angels. Yeah. Thinking about like three-dimensional and two-dimensional vision, because we don't see, we see it's like two-dimensional, right? And then the brain translates it into 3D, but we interact with like the proper 3D world through touch. Like you touch and you can, that's sensing 3 dimensions, but vision really isn't, it just looks like it. So drawing, you know, you're just like doing the same thing as your eye, except paper. And then I was thinking of how to like translate, you could translate a lot of the, I'm going to use the word patterns a lot. It's my new favorite word. Patterns to music. Because that's what I thought when I came into Ustash. It's so stunning, and it's with the pillars, and it's like the Mines of Moria. But it looks like music in stone. It reminds me of that. Like it's the same thing. But it is. Because pattern. Hierarchies. Oh, Jordan Peterson. I don't even watch him because I just watch Jonathan Pageau because I think that Pageau is like further along. Peterson is maybe a good bridge for the uninitiated. So I was thinking also, like, how much of this requires you to, like, be me to understand it, which is a lot, because I'm alone a lot with myself, the benefit of which is that I can think very deeply. The detriment is that I have difficulty communicating what I have thought. Yeah. Like, and then you have those little things that are on a 2D surface, but they look 3D, which is kind of the inverse of what's going on with our vision, because that's three-dimensional, but it, like, is projected 2D, and then we, like, make it 3D, so it's, like, inverting the... It makes sense, I guess, to project a 3D. Although I do like, almost prefer, the medieval style of putting, or the just traditional, or, like, ancient, where you have the mess with the perspective and have it be more concentrated and more abstract and stylistic, and, like, a person's way off in the distance, but the person's really big, so you can see, like, the important things are big. But it's so beautiful. And all of the shapes, and just all of the patterns, the order, and then the way that they interact. So it's, the cathedral is a sort of, like, in communion and talking with itself, repetition with variation, and then with the viewer as well, because you're looking at it and you're, like, following all of the different lines and looking everywhere, and also if you're familiar with the stories and what's in the paintings or the stained glass is the best. You're, like, again, so it's like this building and altering of expectations. And for instance, there was, so, like, well, it's because things repeat, then they're different. It's okay. If you've been in a cathedral, you know what I mean. Which, yeah. So, but that's, it kind of builds on the whole angels being patterns thing, because it, like, then we're also brought into that, and but speaking of, oh yeah, and then, like, the cathedral, so for instance there was this dome part, not a dome, there's a word for it, you know, where it goes like X, but it's like up, and one of them had stars painted on the underside, and then the other one over here had a different pattern of, like, little dots interspersed with little asterisk type things. So it's the same area, the same type of pattern, but it's like, oh, okay, there, and you are, like, looking, yeah. But then those are in communion with each other, but then also with other cathedrals and other buildings that follow the same general plan, and then, of course, with the real, not real, but with the more direct, less artificial, I guess, yeah, like the stars in the sky, and the stars on the pattern, metaphor, allegory, essences, and then I was thinking, this doesn't fit with the rest of the thought, but just the idea of, yeah, like a center, or like one central, say, object, or basically like a seed, and then having the whole, like a focal point, yeah, and then, like, having a whole structure built around that to elaborate from it, And like if you imagine a cathedral being constructed around, as they are, like around the cross, right, in the focal point. And then everything else is kind of centered around that, built around it. But this kind of implies as well that that whole structure around to house the little seed, or like pearl, or like the focal point, however you want to say it, implies that that whole structure is implicit within the center, and that it's everything that's around is sort of a drawing out of what is inside of the center. And it has to do with like emergence and emanation. I think that's a John Vervaeke term. And also, that's kind of, I guess, one way to look at what's going on with humans, or with any, like, sacred space, or any place, or anything that serves as a center, as we do. But, like, or a god, or, yeah, like a sacred place in the center of a country, or the mythological mountains, or, like, navels of the world. But there's that one central thing, and then everything else is around it, but that implies, because it implies, like, a mirror, or a reflection of. What is that from? Oh, yeah, somebody was explaining astrology like that, I believe. They had like if you would imagine a diamond, and all of the sparkling and all of the facets in a dark room, like where then it was casting lights on like the walls, and they said to inverse the image and imagine that. It was interesting. I wish that astrology in the full, like, I don't know much about it, but apparently the full ancient sense would come back, but with all of our modern knowledge of the stars, because it could be made to fit. It's just we've gone way too far, and we're like out on a limb, going to fall. Yeah. So that image. And the main thing that I was thinking about is, again, about like building expectations and altering expectations. When something is new, you think of something new as something strange, or like completely new and unexpected. But the sensation of newness is, I find, most perfectly felt in something familiar and like expected, but with a relatively small difference. And this is similar to the whole thing about, which I made another video about, but freedom, the most free choices being also the most inevitable ones. So that absolute autonomy and free will, because there's no such thing as absolute autonomy, because that would be like, there would be nothing to choose from, or like it would be a totally empty universe. It doesn't even make sense. So therefore, like, I guess therefore, freedom is more like harmony, and the freest choices, if you think of the most choices that you've ever made, those would probably also be the ones that you would describe as most inevitable. Because we are, in the end. I think it has to do with the body, which most things do. Because, like, when you make a choice, defining choice, you also make that because of the kind of person that you are, which feels inevitable. Because it's like, well, I'm this kind of person, of course I'm going to do that, or I want this, so I'm going to choose it. But that's also freedom, right? So it's like, anyway, which is like that whole paradox of the opposites, or not a paradox, but a seeming paradox of this like thing of the most opposite and extreme meet at the end, like in a circle. If you take a line and then curve it around, the two extremes will meet, and indeed there is opposites. Yeah, there's that thing about that. And then balance being the tension of opposites. But for example, have a lot of examples. What this is I guess like, just, yeah, like a pattern that manifests in a lot of ways. I really need to learn math, don't I? Like in the cathedral, you might be surprised because you have like this one dome and there's stars, and then the other one, oh, there's like a different pattern. So you're like, oh, that's new and surprising. But if it would be one dome, there's stars, and you turn over and it's like the middle of a forest with like a fountain in the middle. There's not even any connection to be surprised from. Like, they don't hold together at all. So to have something new, you have to have some amount of sameness in order to like perceive any newness at all. And that is why our society is broken. Trying to see, I have like a little chart here, which I should affix to the video. But I have not the technology at the moment. Pero, yeah, it was like, so something that's completely new in the sense of strange and absolutely other actually would be imperceptible, completely imperceptible to us, wouldn't it? Because, like, I should start with the easier to understand examples. So, something like, okay, if we were in Botherance, languages, yeah, okay. So, you think a totally new language to you, like Chinese. Completely foreign language is all Greek to you, right? It's almost like boring and it just goes into just sound. So that's not really that nice sensation of like newness and interest and surprise. Or maybe just like for a second. The novelty wears off very quickly because there's nothing to like hold on to. It's just like, you don't perceive anything. Because there's no familiarity to allow you to even perceive, right? So if I'm hearing, I don't know, French or Italian, it's like nice because it's different and new, and there's things I don't understand, but there's things that I do understand because of the similarities. But if I was to hear Chinese, or if I was to hear animal sounds, I don't know what those communicate. Or if I was, so you see, it kind of fades off and there becomes less of that interest in the newness because it's unfamiliar, because it's too new. Or if you were on, because you might think of like a new place as somewhere that's completely different from anywhere you've ever been. But like, if we were in a place like that, like in a totally alien planet where things worked completely differently, it would just become quickly boring and everything would be incomprehensible and maybe interesting for like 2 seconds, but then it just becomes just so much noise because there's no familiarity, there's no structure, there's nothing to hold on to. And to push this to its extreme, and I keep saying like completely new, obviously something that's completely new would be imperceptible, right? Like it would have to be totally other than anything that we've ever encountered before, which would mean that, like, yeah, we wouldn't be able to perceive or interact with it at all. It was like any kind of perception, and this is connected to a bunch of things about like metaphor and surfaces and essences, analogy as the fuel and fire of thinking by Douglas Hofstadter and Emmanuel Sander. But to perceive something at all, or in any meaningful way, requires like some level of knowledge of it, or some level of knowledge of it in its context, like to perceive, or certainly to perceive something as what it is, and really to perceive it at all, requires some level of experience with it. That is to say, some amount of mirroring between like you and the object, some kind of link. That's another area of thought. But yeah, therefore, something completely new would be absolutely imperceptible, and something that is so new as to be where like all that is, yeah, like Chinese, you can tell maybe from the tone a little bit. Then what if it was a culture or a species, like some alien species or something, where their tone meant different things? It would just be noise and pure noise, and like it's not interesting, and it's not really new in the sense that we mean new. Which implies familiarity. Yeah. So something that is pleasantly new is almost paradoxically what is most familiar, or set within what is most familiar. Because the newest thing, like the newest thing that I can think of, like I guess the real example is like a baby, because that's you and the person that you love and know best in the world together, but then it produces absolute newness. But I have not had a baby, so I don't know what that's like. So, I know what it's like, but I don't know what it is. So, but the newest thing that I would call most new is the person that like is most familiar or closest to me, but just for them to like smile in a different way, or that feels most new despite the familiarity. Okay, part of this is familiarity does not either breed contempt. Familiarity breeds love. Knowledge and love are one. So yeah, familiarity does not necessarily breed contempt. I don't like that phrase. It's not true. Anyway, it has to do, I think, also with the body versus like the spirit, or like, because you have the sort of, you have the familiarity to support this newness. You have all of your previous rapport and past and history with the person to support like that new thing of theirs. This would benefit from a re-recording. So like another example of something that's pleasantly new is like the sparkling water, right? Because I've drank water my whole life. I have seen water fountains and drank from water fountains before, but not sparkling water. So it's the familiarity, but then a change, variation, repetition with variation. That's the true newness. Which, like, I guess, free choice within the parameters that are... No, I wouldn't say it like that. Never mind, we won't get back into the free will thing, that's a different thread. So, for instance, but, as I say, this is why our society is such a mess. Because, okay, so let's say you have clouds, or we've all seen clouds many times and admired because they're beautiful, or a piece of music. Then what would be pleasantly new is to see like those really wavy clouds that they just discovered, which are like awe-inspiring because they're so different from normal clouds, and like, whoa. because you have a previous, like, there's a good amount of time and of, like, familiarity built up with the clouds, then you can do something new, and it's like, oh. Or, like, I don't know, a key change, or, yeah, like a key change in music, in a piece of music, which is new. But let's say that the clouds the next day were a different kind of wavy, and the next day a different kind of wavy, and then they were like sheep or like birds falling from the sky, and it just was like, okay, new, different. Yeah, I suppose the connection between new and different. There's a lot to do with time. Everything has to do with time. Because it's like in music, it has to do with like the time. I mean, it's the timing, right? If you have a new thing, also, you have to like space it out. But or if you just keep changing the key randomly, and especially close together, without any kind of preparation or any kind of return to anything more familiar, basically the coherence breaks down. Like, I mean, if it started just raining, the clouds started being random objects. I don't know why I went from clouds to precipitation, but I suppose that's appropriate because that's what happens. One forgets sometimes about the water cycle. We are so disconnected from nature. People would just be like, well, the sky's broke. And then it wouldn't even be like clouds anymore. So basically, like, the gestalt and the category of what is clouds and what is expected in the clouds and what is new and cool, like, that whole thing just breaks. There's nothing even there anymore. You just destroyed it. It's not anymore. It's not fruitful anymore of these new things if we go back to the baby example. And we've lost all coherence, and it's à rebours. Then you get into that deadly apathy of just like, well, okay, total randomness, and nothing is like enough anymore. Yeah. It's just noise, and it falls apart because you've lost the gestalt, you've lost the coherence. Yeah. So that's kind of a pattern that's happened in the modernity. And it, like, and again, I try not to criticize modernity as such, because obviously, well, there has been positive progress, I mean, and certainly, but at the same time, what have we produced that truly is as full of meaning and coherence and beauty as the cathedrals? Nothing yet. We're in a very rough period of like chaos and falling apart. And I think trying to, like, I don't know, well, there's a whole bunch of ways to describe what's gone wrong with the society, and I'm still half in the society, so it's difficult to properly understand what's gone wrong. But yeah, and this is a Catholic book, so he's coming at it from a Catholic perspective, but it's good. He's a good writer and a good thinker. John Senior, The Decline of the Christian West. He's a good writer, and he uses good images. And he says it becomes like that. It becomes when you have just novelty for novelty's sake, and new things for new things' sake, novelty. You get to this deadly apathy and like disgust, and it's à rebours, in reversed nausea and ennui. So, yeah, and I think, yeah, it's nausea because it's fallen apart now. It's even just ceased to be a thing. Because, you know, how far can you push it? How far can you push this, like, and I mean, it's interesting, quite, like, how far can you push this piece of music before it ceases to be music at all? How far can you push? Yeah. But we seem to have just gone way off into that rabbit trail. Or, like, okay. There is a pattern that is being enfleshed, as far as such things can be enfleshed, which is less than other things. That is being enfleshed these days. Of this. Not everywhere, not in all ways, but it is a pattern and it does show up. So the pattern is what I'm like highlighting and criticizing. So it's the thing of just like forgetting that there was even such a thing as it just becomes, yeah. But what was beautiful was the connection between all of these ideas of like, yeah, and how like something that's new is really, or the thing that's the most new that you would call, oh, that's like new and surprising, and is connected closely, I think, to something being interesting. But interesting, we understand that it's a balance between, or a tension of opposites between between complete familiarity and like complete strangeness and newness. Because I guess if you bring time into it, it's new. Technically, like, each moment is always completely new, but then there's carryover of all the past, so it's not new. Because if it was, you'd lose all sense of coherence of time. Yeah, same thing. But en fin, cathedrals are the best places to think. And the thing that's the most new is also to be found in the place, or, yeah, to be found in the place that's the most familiar and the most expected. And familiarity does not breed contempt. But no, this is not like a preachy, or not like a, I don't have an agenda. It's just, an interesting and quite deep pattern that connects to a lot of others. Paradoxes are cool. And sparkling water fountains.